You're listening to Sensitive Changemakers. This podcast is created for highly sensitive leaders and is designed to support you to embrace your strengths and gifts so you can feel more confident in your own mind and body and live a life with intention, purpose, and more importantly, joy. I'm your host, Kate Carter, a fellow HSP who has a BA Honours degree in education, is a fully trained and qualified professional coach and NLP practitioner, and has over 17 years of teaching and over 3 years of coaching experience supporting highly sensitive people. I believe that you can do anything you want to in this life, but that sometimes the path forward becomes muddy with self-doubt and fear of failure. It's my mission to help sensitive thought leaders peel away the self-doubt and stories holding them back, for them to see their own beauty and strength so they can increase self-confidence and self-trust through thought and embodiment work, and see their path clearly and move forward confidently, living their life with intention and purpose. I would love for you to come and join us. Hello and welcome to Sensitive Changemakers. I hope the week is going well for you whenever you're listening to this. It is wet and drizzly here. I know that I'm completely British here talking about the weather, but it is, just wet and horrible. So I hope it's nice wherever you are. I really want to kind of go back to basics on something that I used to talk a lot about when I started my business, even as far back as sort of 5 years ago. And I think it's an important conversation to have, especially with the lens of being highly sensitive. And that is the topic of anxiety. Now, this is something that if you've been following me for a while, you know it's my own backstory, it's my own kind of experiences. But it's also what I've learned through my own journey, having clients with anxiety, and also my training in kind of NLP. And I have done a lot, and I've said this before, a lot of kind of basic training in CBT and counselling, psychotherapy, and all of that combined really just gives me a much better idea of why it happens, how it's there, and what we can do about it. I would like to caveat this conversation by saying everybody's different, and so you're all going to have your different journeys and what works for you and what you find is really beneficial. And so take what works for you, take what resonates, and kind of leave the rest. I'm going to talk it through some steps that I found particularly useful, and I know it's worked really well with clients. And again, take what works for you. So first of all, anxiety. So according to the NHS, anxiety is a feeling of unease, such as worry or fear, that can be mild or severe. I would like to add to that everybody has anxiety at some point in their life. And it's, for the majority of us, quite mild. It might be worrying about an exam, worrying about a test, worrying about children, your own kids, that sort of thing. There's always an element of anxiety. And one thing that I didn't understand when I was younger was anxiety is normally a future worry. It's normally a, what if this happens? What if this happens? I can't cope because this is going to happen type thing. It's a worry of the future. And as a result, you can find yourself having conversations with a lot of people saying, well, it hasn't happened yet. What are you worrying about it? Which I think is the most unhelpful comment ever. But logically, it makes sense, doesn't it? Of course, it hasn't happened yet. Why are you worrying about it? But obviously, we are not always logical creatures, and we do have a huge amount of emotion inside us. And sometimes when we do have anxiety, we are not in a logical state of mind. We are running on our fight or flight response. And those kind of comments really just make us feel guilty for the way that we're feeling, rather than actually supporting us in seeing a way forward. And so I think what we really need to focus on here is proven and successful tools that are going to support you in a loving way, so that you can actually see your own way forward and your own kind of mini steps. Because I do think, yes, anxiety can be reduced greatly very quickly, but for some of us it takes a little bit longer, and that's okay wherever you are on the journey. So the first point that I always work with on myself and with every client I've ever worked with is awareness, because you can't change what you don't know. And I know when I was a child, I would and as an adult as well, I would have the physical symptoms of anxiety and my panic disorder before I even realized why they were there. And that was because I had no awareness of my thought processes or my inner dialogue or my inner world, really. I just reacted, and then I would wonder why I couldn't breathe properly, or I felt sick, or I thought I was going to faint, or all of these kind of very physical reactions we have with anxiety. And so the first thing I would say is awareness, spending some time reflecting or in the moment. I always find if you're right at the start of this journey, reflection at the end of the day is probably more useful because you can dedicate some time to it and it becomes something you can kind of introduce into your day rather than trying to do it on the spot. When again, if you're quite anxious, trying to reflect about why you're feeling the way that you are when it's happening is really difficult because you're already in the throes of anxiety at that point. And as we've said before, when you're in the throes of anxiety, logic has gone out the window and said goodbye for a while. And so trying to reflect why you're in the state you are is probably not the best time to do it. So I always advise, if that's you, reflect at the end of the day rather than in the moment. So what you're looking for when you're doing these reflections is just looking at, okay, so when did I feel most anxious today? What was happening around me at that time? What was happening before that, to the hours leading up to that point? What was I like when I woke up at the start of the day today? Was I feeling kind of a little bit off anyway? Anybody, the closest thing I can link it to really is that Monday morning feeling that I think everybody can relate to. But with anxiety, that might come up at any point, at any time. And some of us wake up like that every single day, and it doesn't really have anything to do with work or what's going on around us per se. It is just that we have got caught in that loop of anxiety kind of ruling every part of us. And so if you're feeling like that every morning, then kind of get curious. What is going on around there? How did you feel before you went to bed? What is your thought processes around that? And some of us, it takes a little bit of time to kind of dig a little bit deeper into this. And this is where, if you're struggling in this part and you're thinking, actually, I don't know why, I'm trying to reflect, but nothing's coming up, but I just know that I'm feeling this way, then that is a great indication to get some support and ask for help and have somebody who can kind of be there with you and break it down and shine a light on maybe things that you're talking about or feeling that you can't necessarily see, but that somebody else who's trained in that might be able to. And so that first point of gaining awareness, I think, is really crucial. And if you do need any support with this, I have been doing this for quite a while now, so please do reach out. I'm more than happy to have a session with you. I am going to just say very quickly here, because I'm celebrating my birthday month, so December is my birthday month, and I'm celebrating starting my in-person sessions in January in Ibstock, I am reducing all of my offers. So everything is £10 off. So now sessions start at £40. So if you're interested in having a look in more detail about what a session would include, please go over to my website. I'll put the link in the show notes. These are both online services and in-person services. So this is for the month of December 2023 and January 2024. So go over to that and have a look. And we can absolutely look at the thought patterns and the behaviors that are around and present when you're feeling anxious. So awareness is always the first key. The second thing that I think is very simple, writing it down and saying it out loud, but actually is quite difficult for us to do, especially if you have quite a long history of having anxiety, is going to be a lot of guilt and shame around having anxiety, especially if you've had it since childhood, because you have probably been told at one point to get over it or to stop worrying, or other people are worse off than you. And that creates an element of guilt and an element of shame. And so this second point can actually feel, even though it's quite simple on paper, very difficult in practice. And that is showing yourself some compassion and understanding that this is just how you have lived up until this point. There is nothing wrong with you. There is nothing broken. It's just some habits that you've learned and embedded over time. And there are different reasons for this. You know, you don't necessarily have to find the root of your anxiety to resolve it. I am very interested in why, so I do like that part of it, and it was really important for me on my own journey to understand why it was there and how it was happening. And I have concluded that a lot of it was because I was so highly sensitive as a child and so empathic that I couldn't work out what was mine and what was somebody else's, took on a huge amount of emotion that wasn't actually originating from me, and really just felt for other people when they were going through difficult situations, and kind of internalized that for myself, and then it became a vicious circle and couldn't really see my way out. And then obviously my own anxiety kind of was built on that. And so I found that really interesting. But the main point of this is really kind of just, how can you show yourself some compassion as you're going through this journey, rather than I've got to get rid of this anxiety because it's ruining my life or it's stopping me from doing everything I want to do. And while those things might be true, that's not going to support you in creating a future that is beneficial for you. Because if you're coming at it from a bashing, judgmental place, when things don't work out the way you want, you're just going to revert back to old patterns, and that isn't going to support you in making any kind of long-lasting change. And it's the same with anything that we try to change. If you get the example of diet and eating well, if you're constantly bashing your body over not being the perfect shape or the perfect weight, as soon as you see the scale go up, or as soon as you see, I don't know, an inch go on your waist or whatever it is, and you suddenly think, oh, this isn't working, and you just give up. It's that all or nothing attitude. And so instead of having that judgmental perspective, really trying to cultivate a more compassionate understanding. And I really do enjoy getting curious. It seems to be a kind of hack that I used. It sounds really simple, but it was really beneficial. So instead of getting judgmental, get curious. Okay, so why is that happening? When I do that, I wonder why I feel like that when somebody says that, or I wonder why I think those things about myself, which leads to, I don't know, getting very anxious about a particular situation. And so getting curious is a really useful tool here. And even though it's not specific to one event or one tool, I think it's just an overarching good thing to do. So have a go, see how you're feeling around getting curious and being more compassionate to yourself as you're going through this journey, because I do think a lot of people forget that. And having been through the process myself and having supported so many people through this, that curiosity and lack of judgment is so important. And the other thing that comes up for me around here is the language that you're using. And this is where NLP comes in. This is why I love NLP, because it really does look at the language that you're using for yourself, to yourself, that inner dialogue. So if you find yourself saying things like, it's always going to be like this, it's never going to go away, I feel completely powerless, I'm trapped, I'm going to have this forever, that kind of language is obviously then kind of supporting that anxiety further, if you see it that way, because you become kind of in a pattern of looking for the things that make you feel powerless, looking for the things that make you feel more anxious, and then you get trapped in that cycle. And the brain science behind this is the reticular activating system, say it properly, which is a wonderful part of the brain that looks for things that match up to our inner world, what we think is true and what we think is important for us. Now, this is done on a very subconscious level. It's not something we can control. But again, we can create an awareness around it. And one of the ways that we can kind of see how this is playing out is through the language that we're using, because the more language that we use, the more we see that in our external world. And an example that I was always taught was when you start to think about buying a new car and you have an idea of the model that you want, you start to see that car everywhere. And it was the same for me when I was pregnant. So as soon as I was pregnant, I saw pregnant ladies everywhere. And it's that idea, because suddenly that thing is very important to you. And so you see it everywhere. And if we use that to look at anxiety here, if you're constantly saying to yourself, I'm completely powerless, this is always going to be the case, I'm never going to feel any different, then that's what you're going to see in your external world as well. And it's not to say that that isn't true, but it's to say that actually, if we change what's happening on the inside, then the external world will shift as well. And so the language that we're using around that compassionate side of things, is actually incredibly powerful, and getting curious is a really good hack. The next thing, so step 3, if you like, is mindfulness. And one thing that I kind of want to say here, and my mindfulness tool has always been meditation and visualization. That's been really supportive. So I will talk about that, but there's lots of different ways that you can practice mindfulness. That's just my preferred style. But the reasoning that this is so important is because we've got the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. So our sympathetic nervous system is much more that fight, flight response or fawn. And this is kind of activated. Again, all of this is completely normal. There is not like an abnormal wrong part of us. This is all normal human being behavior. Yeah. And so the sympathetic nervous system gets activated when we are faced against something that's a threat. That's what it was there for. So back when we had to run away from some kind of predator, that's what it was there for. It gave us the extra energy in our body to fight or fly away from it or to run away from it, should I say. I wish we had wings. And so that's what it gave us the energy for. However, there are a couple of things that are really interesting here. Number one is our brain does not know the difference between real and imaginary, which is, I think, just almost like a mini superpower, because that's how powerful our brain is. I think it's amazing. It also shows the importance of visualization. If you look at any kind of athletes and things like that, they use this quite often to prepare themselves for races and games and stuff like that. So I love that. But on the flip side of that, if our brain doesn't know the difference between real and imaginary, then there might not be a real threat there. It might be something we've perceived. It might be something we've created in our own mind, and our body doesn't know any different. And so it reacts in the same way as though it was a threat. And if we have anxiety, we have a consistent anxiety habit, this is where this part of us has been activated, probably more so than other people. And so our go-to reaction is to react in a fight, flight, or freeze mode. And that is a habit that we kind of need to break down and stop. And one of the ways that we can do that is by bringing in how to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system is all about rest, restore, relax. This is how we're feeling when we sleep, we eat, we meditate. Anything like that is a very calming activity. And I found it really interesting that one of the habits that I'd created before I'd even realized all of this stuff was when I felt poorly or when I felt stressed, the first thing I would do would be to go and find food. And yes, we can talk. I mean, I'm not a huge expert on nutrition, but one of the things that I do know is that eating is quite grounding. It brings you into the present moment because you are digesting, you are eating and digesting. And it can be incredibly calming for a lot of people. And I realized that's what I did before I even realized about mindfulness, is I would always go to food, because if I could eat something, then I knew I was okay. Because obviously really poorly people or people who are really struggling can't. And so it felt like that was a very grounding, calming activity for me. Now, obviously there are pros and cons to that, as my weight gain found out later. But I know, for example, when I was really, really poorly, when I was 9 or 10 and I was refusing food, I couldn't eat because I was that poorly. And so as I got older, you know, people have a field day with my mind, but that's kind of why I really latched onto that. And then as I gained some more information into mindfulness, that's why I chose meditation and visualization, because that allowed me the time to activate my parasympathetic nervous system. And in effect, you are creating a new habit in your body. And so I always say to people, give it time, have that curiosity, but don't stop doing it when you feel well, because it's not about a consequence. It's not about you have an anxiety, oh, I need to do some meditation. It's you creating a new foundational habit every single day, or however, you know, what consistency looks like to you, so that you can actually feel calmer all of the time. So it's not a kind of knee-jerk reaction to having an anxiety attack or having anxiety every day, or I've got to meditate because I'm feeling anxious today. It should be the foundational layer beneath that. And so a lot of people don't practice mindfulness when they feel better. And actually, all you're teaching your body there is a kind of incomplete circle or an incomplete circuit. You're doing some of the work, but not the full work. And I want you to kind of view it through creating a new habit. That's what you're doing here. You're creating a new habit. You're not doing it just because you're anxious. You're creating a new habit so you can activate that parasympathetic nervous system on a more regular basis. So your body learns, actually, it doesn't always need to respond through fight, flight, or freeze. There's another response that we could use here. And so just giving and allowing yourself to kind of choose again. And so that mindfulness thing is, or that mindfulness part is really important. And again, it's whatever works for you. It might be as simple as being out in nature and going for a walk is your mindfulness routine, because that really supports you in breathing a bit deeper and feeling nice and calm and relaxed. For me, like I said, it's meditation, and I definitely feel it when I don't practice it. I practice mine every day, and I do feel the difference when I don't. I'm not kind of a person who has an addictive nature, and so there are days when I don't meditate, and I don't beat myself up about that. It's just, I go with the flow sometimes, but when I don't do it, I do feel the difference. And so that is a habit for me that I've been doing at least the last 6-7 years, and it's really made a difference, again, because I don't react now in fight, flight or freeze response quite as much as I used to. Obviously, it's still there. It's part of every human being. It's there for a reason. But I don't react like that for every single situation, which was what I was doing when I was younger. So there is much more of I can kind of, when something happens that previously would have triggered me into a panic attack, for example, I now have an extra step where I can kind of have that trigger because it's there, but I can kind of take a step back and take an extra breath and go, it's okay, which I never was able to do before. And the last part that I think, again, is really dependent on who you are as a person and what works for you, is to choose again. So I've just alluded to it a little bit there about me being able to be in a situation that historically would have triggered me into an anxiety or a panic attack, and actually just having an extra step in there where I get to breathe before I then react. And this is what I would really like you to think of as the last step. So there's lots of different ways that this can be done. I'm going to name a few that have worked really well for me and for people I've worked with. So inner dialogue. The inner dialogue that you have with yourself is incredibly important, because as we've discussed before, language is so vital. So if you're constantly saying the same things to yourself over and over again, your thoughts impact your emotions, which impact your behavior, which impact your actions. And so if you're constantly thinking the same thing over and over again, you're going to constantly feel the same way, and you're going to constantly behave in the same way. And as a result, you're going to choose the same sort of actions. And in a typical anxiety response, if you are thinking that you are completely powerless and trapped and it's never going to change, that's going to affect your emotions, and it's going to affect that anxious response. That's going to lead to the same behaviors that you've always done, and that's going to lead to the same actions that's always happened. And that's when you get caught in that loop. So when I'm talking about choosing again here, I'm talking about pattern interrupting. I'm talking about stopping that loop, breaking that loop, and choosing again, so that you don't always have the same response. So getting really curious about your language, which we've spoken about before, is one of the ways to do that. And then there are so many different ways to do this. Growth mindset, I think, really helps here, which is the power of, you're not able to do it yet, like the power of yet, which I think is so, it's such a small step, but it really can be such a powerful one, especially if you are quite new to the sort of this kind of journey, and it feels like a huge jump to go from being really anxious to not having any anxiety or not having panic attacks, and that could feel too big a jump. Looking at the power of yet, like I haven't worked that out yet, I'm not quite sure what that looks like yet, is actually, it doesn't sound overly positive, but it is an incredibly powerful statement, because what you're saying is, I will figure it out, I just haven't figured it out yet. So the power of it can be really supportive if you are right on that scale of, this is completely new to me, I'm not really sure what this looks like. If you're further up in your development, then looking again at shifting the language that you're using from this is never going to happen to this is going to happen. I'm going to find a way. And again, working with your thoughts and beliefs, because I could say here a load of affirmations, but if you and your subconscious can't grab onto any of those, they're going to be useless to you. And you'll just be saying a load of words and phrases that actually don't mean anything. So work with somebody here who can get into your psyche, who can really understand your thoughts and your that inner dialogue, and actually use that as fuel to create some new language, to create some, I'm going to use the word affirmations here because I think everybody knows what I mean here, but creating that powerful language that is supportive for you but also resonates with you. So when you do say it to yourself, it means something, and not just kind of just saying something while everybody else is saying this, or just say the same. So really do carefully choose the language that you want to say to yourself. And then, like I said, that choosing again, that's from a kind of inner dialogue language perspective, but you've got to choose again in terms of somatic. So in terms of your body, this is something that I find a lot of people don't work with. We work a lot with the mindset and the brain and the thought patterns, which again, incredibly powerful, not dissing those. We've just spoken about how incredibly powerful they are, but also the somatic, the physical body, and how we hold things in our body. So all of that anxiety we've been holding, we hold it there in our body. We tense our shoulders, we tense our neck, and over time that can cause aches and pains and all sorts of different things, or illnesses and things like that, because we've been holding it inside ourselves for so long. So again, the choose again here is, how can you release some of that from inside your body? So just dancing, yoga, whatever exercise you like to do, walking, shaking it out. There are so many different things that you can do, but actually involving your body in the process can be really incredibly powerful here. So how can you choose again in your body? And one of the most simple ways that I started with when I was going through my journey was just practicing breathing out longer than I breathed in. And I know that sounds such a small step, but that's what I needed at the time. I couldn't go out and run for miles. Number one, I'm not a runner. And number two, at that point, I was so poorly that I couldn't get on board with that. It scared the hell out of me. And that's probably a topic for another podcast. But I was really kind of stuck. And so I needed to start really, really small. And so just practicing elongating my breath for longer than I breathed in was really supportive, because as anxious people, we're really good at taking breaths in. When we get anxious, we are constantly breathing in, and actually just teaching our body that we can get to breathe out as well. And so that was a really important starting point for me. So if that's where you're at, start from there. Again, if you're a little bit further on in your journey, you can look at different things. You can look at exercise if that helps. You can look at just dancing around the room, shaking it out, yoga, any of those things, really to get the body on board as well as the mind. Breath work is another one. Again, I've practiced breath work, but I'm not an expert in it. So go and do have a look if that is something you might be interested in. But there's loads of ways that you can get your body on board. And so that choose again point is very dependent on you as a person, what you need, where you're at, where you want to be. And I've given you a couple of ideas there that maybe you can investigate further or ask for support around, but really looking at how you get to take back that control and to remind your mind and your body that you are powerful, that you do get to choose again, that you don't have to put up with what you've put up with so far to this point, that actually just because you've had anxiety for however many months, years, decades, it doesn't mean that it always has to be there and in the same way that it is now. And I wish somebody, when I was really poorly, had made that clear, that actually, if I shifted things in my eternal world, I would see the benefits of it in my external world. Now, I didn't get that for a long, long time. But I think if that helps anybody today, then I'm happy. Because I think we talk about mental health a lot. We talk about different support systems, and yes to all of those things. But the buck lies with us. And if we can actually shift our internal world and how it looks and how it feels and what we're telling ourselves, then I promise you, you will see so many positive changes in your external world and how you show up in that world and how you feel about that world, because it does start with us. So I hope that's been really useful. I would love to hear your take on it, your experiences, any of the tools that you're going to use, or any tools that you've tried yourself and what you've or how you found them to be. And I'm sending you so much love, and I will be back next week with another episode. See you soon. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. If you have any takeaways or any questions, please do reach out to me either through Instagram, LinkedIn or Facebook at Kate Carter Coaching, or you can email me at kate@katecarter.co.uk. I always love to hear your feedback and the things that you have taken from the podcast. If you know of any other highly sensitive people, then please do share this so that I can reach more and support more highly sensitive people to embrace their strengths and gifts. As a thank you, I will pick a winner every month for a free 50-minute coaching session with me. Thank you so much.